Available on all streaming platforms. It's professional wrestling's greatest, largest, privately owned wrestling library. All the classic hits, flips, slams, and pins of yesteryear are on one place. It's Ultimate Classic Wrestling. Check out the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Mr. USA Tony Atlas, Tito Santana, Rick Martel, a who's who of professional wrestling's greatest spotlight stars ever to grace the squared circle, all in one place. Grab the best seat in the house for memories and mayhem on Ultimate Classic Wrestling.
We are here today. It's the debut episode of the Ultimate Classic Wrestling podcast, and I'm Rick Del Santo. It's Anthony Brennan with me. Anthony Brennan is welcome. How are you, man?
Great. Thanks for having me on here. I've been talking to you a lot for the last 3 or 4 months, so it's great to actually talk to you in person. Because I know I pull up your phone like 24/7, so this is nice. So.
No, it's cool because I got to tell you, man, I'm enjoying it because I've learned so much, especially about the Savoldi thing. That there's so much information I did not necessarily know growing up because I got into it somewhat later. So it's we didn't get it on TV constantly. It was always switch channels or whatever. So
I was always a huge fan of the Savoldis, but I actually really dug deep into the territory about 3 years ago during COVID when I was homeschooling my kids.
Wow.
So it's just, like we had all that downtime, like the kids weren't playing sports. I was driving to work. So what I was doing, I was homeschooling the kids and watching with the volume down. And it just became that rabbit hole because there was really nothing to do,
Yeah. I drank a lot during COVID.
Yeah.
So
I quit 23 years ago. I couldn't start that again.
So no, it was COVID was a very interesting time. Like I said, it was probably my most active alcohol induced summer since probably I was 21 years old.
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
So I guess my vice was ICW wrestling.
Oh no, I started this podcast and probably a couple months before COVID, and then I just dug deep into professional wrestling as a whole. Like got even more into it. Like I was always into it for like 40 years, and then I just started exploring so much. I bought so much like collectibles, merchandise, autographs, belts, you name it. That was just it was just an insane year that year.
Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to have ICW on television, but also I grew up in Natick, Massachusetts, and I was fortunate enough we have a skating rink called West Suburban Arena in Natick, and once a year or so ICW would come in and do some TV tapings where we were. So
really,
and I actually on one show getting yelled at by Phil Apollo on one of these episodes. So
maybe it'll make it up to its network, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, actually it was on the network.
It was?
The Phil Apollo Tom Brandy match where I unintentionally was hijacking the match. So and Phil Apollo yelled at me to sit down. So
that's awesome. I can't wait. Like obviously this probably we've been talking to each other 3-4 months, something like that.
Probably more now.
It's got to be. And I'm not exactly sure what the particular moment. It was probably a podcast I posted in the group or something like that was related.
I remember you were trying to get a hold of Joe Savoldi.
Right.
And you posted something on the group, and I kind of jumped in and was commenting, and you hit my inbox, we just started chatting.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, 3 or 4 months later, you're talking to Mario. I was helping you because it was helping me because you're doing the kind of show that I've been wanting to watch for the last 3 years. So.
Well, I also want to explain here to you, and I've said this, I don't know if I've actually told this, like you've become like an intricate part of the show in the last few months between helping me with the research, helping me get guests or giving me ideas to, hey, reach out to this guy's on Facebook and whatnot. So I have to thank you. I cannot thank you enough because it's given me a sort of new life in the podcasting game. Just when I thought that I was like, oh, I'm going to pull out because I'm just not doing anything fun anymore. But I got to thank you, and you've helped me tremendously, like I said, with the research and notes and all that stuff.
Well, you interview the people I want to see interviewed, so it helps me too. And then what great timing that Mario Savoldi started doing interviews like 3 or 4 months after he got back.
Yes.
Into it, which that's just lightning in a bottle hits you, so yeah.
Well, I wanted to interview him for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And it finally hit. So I was like, forget interviewing guys like, Vince McMahon or Hulk Hogan. Mario Savoldi was the guy I wanted to interview because that is the guy I grew up, thinking was the great, promoter.
And it was awesome how gracious he was to you and how honest he was. And
yeah,
he really, it was nice to see, you know what I mean? So
yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
I absolutely, it was just magical for me to sit there and talk to him for 90 minutes. And it was just great. Yeah. I learned so much.
How like honest he was with you too on some of the details and stuff was great,
Yeah.
Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's thewfia.org, and become a member today.
Hi, this is Bob Smith. You might remember me from my years at Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. Well, now I've started a brand new podcast called The Outdated Wrestling Hour. Yes, we're going to take a whimsical look back at the wrestling figures, stars, and trends from years gone by. We're talking 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and a whole lot more. There's going to be laughs, there's going to be fun, there's going to be action, you name it. Please tune in for the Outdated Wrestling Hour wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, this is the one-man gold mine, the one-man enterprise of professional wrestling and all entertainment, Flynn Hendricks. And you better believe when I'm looking for a good podcast to listen to, I go to my own. I go to the I Know You Hear Me podcast hosted by me, Flynn Hendricks. That is such a fresh perspective for how you should look at life, too. I love that. And then when I'm feeling spooky, I go to my other podcast, Tales from the Haunt, where I want my head shoved inside a 15-pound silicone mask more. I want to have a bucket of sweat coming off me at the end of the night than just Jeff.
Dogs don't lay eggs, Flynn.
I hate you so much. Talk to other scare actors about what it takes to get into the world of scare acting. So if you're curious about how people became professional wrestlers, actors, prioritized their mental health, became entrepreneurs, avoided burnout, or got into scare acting, you need to go check out I Know You Hear Me and Tales from the Haunt, available on all podcasting platforms. And I know you hear me.
Read about the Northern Wrestling Federation in the book presented by Russellville.com, The Pro Wrestling Vault, Volume 2. Hear the story of Roger Ruffin, the man who trained Carl Anderson, the Monster Abyss, Jordan Clearwater, Chris Harris, and Jillian Hall.
Plus 45 other short stories including Jazz, Bobby Eaton, Kamala, Thunder Rosa, Mario Mancini, Scott Casey, PJ Black, Kerry Morton, Sal Renaro, Jeremiah Plunkett, Colby Carino, Bam Bam Malone, and many others.
Get your book today at Russellville.com. Russellville. It's where wrestling lives.
So before we get into, we're going to cover an episode. You don't have the date of the episode, do you?
I know it was in May of 1985.
Okay.
I don't know the exact date, but it was definitely May of 85.
Yeah, because I don't think there was an exact date listed on the network. So
no, it's 05/85. So
yeah.
I know it was early May because that's when Embry first came in there.
Okay. So before we get into that, before reviewing the episode, I want to ask you some wrestling related questions because there's so much. When did you first discover it? That's always my first question.
1983.
Yep.
I was 7 years old. My grandfather used to live about a mile away from us, and he would come over for dinner every Sunday night. And so every Sunday night we used to watch Georgia Championship Wrestling on TBS.
Okay.
Now, my grandfather's a first-generation American who moved here when he was 20. He loved boxing. He loved wrestling. So I started getting into it through him. What's interesting is one day I was watching with my dad because my grandfather got me into it. And my dad was laughing, telling me that, this is phony, this is fake. It actually made me more interested in it when I heard it was fake because I was just intrigued by the whole production,
Yeah.
Initially, my favorite wrestlers were the Road Warriors because I had an older brother and I loved the movie Mad Max and the Road Warrior.
Great movie.
But yeah, the idea that it wasn't real, because I played football, baseball, and basketball even at a young age, made it more interesting to me than it actually being a legitimate competition, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So you basically, a lot of people, you know, steer towards certain wrestlers. You said the Road Warriors. Was there anybody else, especially watching Georgia? If that's your first exposure, that's pretty awesome to professional wrestling.
Yeah, well, it was like the Road Warriors because I love that movie so much.
Yeah.
So because I loved the Road Warriors, I loved Jake the Snake Roberts, the Spoiler, and Joe LeDuc and Ted DiBiase because they were associated with the Road Warriors. So yeah, I guess I was a heel fan just being such a big fan of that movie. You know.
That's pretty interesting. That was the funny part about that is you mentioned Joe LeDuc. I remember I was kind of like a later teen maybe when I first discovered him. I went. There used to be like you know, like a not like a what's that store, like a Five and Dime store or like a Big Lots or something like that. Stuff like that. They had like VHS tapes like Macho Man's Missing Matches and all this stuff. There was all old Memphis matches.
Right.
And there was like this whole thing with like Joe LeDuc in there, like, you know, cutting his arm with the axe and doing the test of strength and fighting Lawler and stuff like that. So that was my first exposure to him. There was a ton of Jerry Lawler on those videos. I think each one had like there was a JYD one, there was a Hogan one. There's all different ones, you know. It was pretty interesting to watch. But that was my first exposure to Joe LeDuc.
Yeah, he was on the Superstation. So anybody associated with Paul Ellring's crew, I liked.
Yeah.
It was just a matter. That was just kind of the timing of it. But my grandfather got me into it. My dad didn't have any interest in it. I really became a WWF fan. I hit the jackpot because in '84, my parents took me to see pro wrestling for the first time. And on my first card, I got to see Andre the Giant first and Masked Superstar and David Schultz versus Hulk Hogan. So and interesting enough, the first match I saw was the Invaders. Talk about infamous match. Jose Gonzalez, which you know what he's infamous for. And one of his opponents was Akira Medea, the guy who legitimately took down Andre the Giant in Japan. So it's kind of, and that was the first match I ever seen.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time in, I believe it was All Japan, and then he formed UWF, the Shoot Fight League, or Shoot Wrestle League. Yeah.
So I mean, of course I did. It was pre-Brody, and I didn't know anything about Akira Medea, but that turned out to be my first match, which was, I look back, I'm like, wow, what a interesting group of characters for your first time. How, you know?
Yeah, that's 1984. That's when like things were really starting to change. So they were bringing in a lot of different characters at that time period, and you know, that's when they started to raid the territories, basically.
Yeah, and because I went to the WWF, that's how I got interested in World Class and the Von Erichs. It was right before David passed away, and I got an issue of WWF magazine, and there was a feature on the Von Erichs in that magazine, and that's how I got into World Class. So
that was go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So it was interesting how the WWF was promoting the Von Erichs in their magazine.
That is very strange. I don't know if that's very strange. I never even heard of that before. So if they were trying to get any of them to come in at that point, or
well, there's rumors that. I mean, I don't know. There's rumors of rumors. I never worked in the business, so I can't. Right. But there's rumors that Vince wanted to go 50-50 with Fritz and go national with the kids. Which does make sense because I picked up that magazine. That's how I found out about them. So
yeah, and World Class was actually internationally pretty famous. Like at that time, it was probably they were shown on national television through ESPN and stuff.
Yeah, we used to get it on channel 25. Actually, the same station where I found the Savolis. I found World Class. They were on like at noon every Saturday. So
yeah. And I think when did the Freebirds come in? Did they come in the early '85?
They were there before I started.
Okay.
So I started watching '84, and the feud was already because I started watching World Class right after David passed away. Just because I saw him in the magazine, and that feud was already hot and heavy. So it must have been before I was watching.
I think they were only in there for less than a month, maybe at the most.
The Freebirds, or
the Freebirds come in to the WWF, I mean.
Oh, the WWF.
Sorry.
I apologize. Yeah, they came in later that year in '85. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. They came in they came in after Cyndi Lauper because Cyndi Lauper's manager Peter Wolf was their wrestling manager.
That's David Wolf. Peter Wolf was Jay Giles' band. Yep.
Exactly. So that must have been. I'm guessing now. That must have been about '85 because that was after Lauper. But they weren't there long, like you said.
Yeah, I just remember only seeing one match at
Yeah,
that point.
and there's a
Like,
lot of urban legends about what happened there, and I don't claim to know because I wasn't there.
yeah, no,
So
but they're
I'm very
fun to read about.
it is. I try to be respectful to know. Like I'm a fan. I've never
Yep.
worked in the business. I've never done anything in the business. I like watching. And I like what I
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. So I'm going to talk about this May 1985 episode of ICW, International Championship Wrestling. I thought the theme music was sound like you're watching the news, kind of.
Yeah, very 80s.
So,
They used that for a couple years.
yeah,
That was the theme for a while. Yeah.
yeah. And then we got to see the handsome face of Gordon Soley opening the show, giving us a rundown of the of events.
Yep, that was right after I think he got pushed out of the Superstation when Jim Crockett brought in Tony Schiavone and his brother. But
Okay.
at the time, he was still commentating in Florida regularly, so he was doing both ICW and Florida Championship Wrestling at that time.
So was there a reason why they pushed him out of there? Or was it just because of his age, or
I
were
think
they?
my guess is Crockett just wanted his own people. Because when Crockett took over from Georgia Championship Wrestling, I think Schiavone and David Crockett were his announcers, so he just stayed with who was his people.
Yeah, and things were changing over there, like kind of
Yeah.
quickly as well.
He bought everybody out, which
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that time, I mean, Gordon Soley was pretty much the voice of the NWA at that time. And it's just like, it seemed like in the 80s, he kind of like, or in the mid 80s, I guess around this time period, it just seemed like it's so weird to think like, but it's like he wasn't necessarily on like the TBS shows, you know what I mean? Which is basically when people think of the NWA, that's a lot of what people think of is everything that's on TBS at that time.
Well, pretty much when Georgia Championship Wrestling lost their time slot.
Yeah.
And then once the Crockett's moved in, they wanted their team in there. So I think that's all it was.
Yeah.
But he continued. He was still the full-time announcer for Eddie Graham at that time, though.
Right. Sure, yeah. That I remember reading that as well and seeing video, obviously.
Right. So he was going back and forth.
Yep. So we got to see clips of Eric Embry versus Joe Savoldi from Puerto Rico, where there was a funny finish, I guess you could say. Or Eric Embry claims that, no, he just won the match.
Right. And those are two of our favorites of all time. So.
I love Eric Embry.
Yeah, me too.
But I didn't know he was in ICW until I watched this episode. I probably watched this 2 or 3 times since it's been put up. And when I saw that, I was just like really, I don't know, shocked. Because I really only remember him from World Class in Memphis, really.
Right.
So,
and I think that was through the WWC in Puerto Rico. Because I know for a fact, I actually just researched it. He just finished up in Mexico. And just entered Puerto Rico. I know in Mexico and Puerto Rico, he booked at both those places at one time or another. But the ICW shows at this time were booked by the Bushwhackers or the Sheep Herders.
I find that very interesting.
Yeah. They were the Savoldi's bookers, yeah.
Yeah. And they were there for a little bit during that time period.
Yes,
I think they're on this
Right.
And then of course, the my favorite line is he says that Jumpin' Joe Savoldi sounds like he's the garbage collector out of the So Embry had the lines even back then.
And what's interesting too is that ICW, the timelines get murky. There was no Al Perez on that show. And
right.
I know Al Perez and Joe Savoldi were the initial ICW tag team champions, actually the WWC tag team champions, and they were recognized. Not sure why Al Perez wasn't there because things changed on the fly with ICW. So, but I did notice he was absent.
Yeah, there was a lot of people in and out. It seemed constantly, and it seemed like they had to make sure they put the belts on certain people that were going to show up. It seemed like that they not necessarily just all of a sudden show up on WWF TV the following week or whatnot.
So I'm not sure if the relationship with WWC was dissolving, and that's because I know they were initially a big team in Puerto Rico before with the Savoldi. So I'm not sure what the story is with that.
So we went to commercial. We come back, and it's Carlos Colon. This is in JD McSlade. This match is fucking weird. It starts joined in progress, but it's pretty much like it's just there's nothing to it really. In the crowd, it doesn't seem necessarily interested either. No,
well, I mean, he was a big star in Puerto Rico.
Yes, he was.
I'm not sure, like in Waltham, Mass, and Bangor, Maine, if people really. I'm not sure. I mean, it was 40 years ago, and
Yeah.
I don't know if there was any connection to him there. It's hard to tell. I did notice that Dory Funk, he was not the WWC heavyweight champion at that time.
Okay.
I know Dory Funk beat him in Bangor, Maine on an ICW show, and I think it was the only time that title switched hands outside of Puerto Rico.
Okay.
But
then,
yeah, I know nothing about JD McSlade though.
I've never heard of him outside of this. I don't think. But then, it's just like I don't even remember like a finish happening. That's how many. Like it just kind of just seemed like it just was like abrupt. Like it was so weird the way that this was put into the show.
Yeah, but it was kind of it's kind of hazy. I saw it like an hour ago, and it's still hazy.
Yeah. Then we had Eric Embry and Rick Reed. Embry, of course, goes over, and Savoldi comes out and taunts him a little bit, and then they just cut the commercial break. There's no real like nothing crazy really happens here either. Even though it's like Savoldi's going to come out and taunt him, and there was no brawl, there was nothing, and just cut to commercial.
Yeah, it wasn't. I know Rick Reed. It was a local journeyman. He actually wrestled underneath for the NWF as well. DC Drakes League. I don't remember him ever really getting a green light push from anybody, but he was always around.
Yeah, I remember him. I do remember him. Of course, like you mentioned earlier, the Sheepherders came in against Lou Fabiano and is Jimmy Owens?
Jimmy Owens was the guy. I think.
Okay, I got the guys.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear it right at the first time, and then I had to go back and write it, but I wasn't sure if I had the first name right.
And Luffy, Fabiano's just like the nicest guy going, and I wish he'd do a shoot interview, but he's just a very nice, humble guy who
really
like to talk to. Yeah, Luffy, he's a great guy. He just finished up jobbing with the AWA on this.
Okay.
But Lou Fabiano had a great career. Him like Mark Paul, Kalua, Winters were jobbing for the AWA in Pennsylvania and Ohio, but he was the New York Brawler in Memphis where he got a big push. He was Sheik Hussein in the WWC years after.
Okay.
Him and Billy Anderson were the Mercenaries in Japan.
I know who that is. Yeah.
Yeah, he teamed with Mike Davis in Continental. So Luffy had a really nice career for himself, although he's working underneath here,
So, he was all over the territories, really.
Yeah.
I do remember him in various different places as a kid.
And I know early 90s, he did some jobs in WCW. He did some stuff for WWF. So this wasn't like his most glorious moment, but he had a great career, outside of this. So he actually came back and through Canada. Him and Jonathan Holiday were pushed with the Savolis like in '87.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he wrestled as himself, and sometimes he wrestled as a Super Destroyer. But so he did get his due in ICW a couple years later.
Then, of course, we had the Hangman and Joe Savoldi.
Now, the Hangman is actually was a legend in Montreal.
Yeah.
And that is like the connection to the Savolis. But he was it's funny how he comes in to do a job here. He's getting older later in his career, but he was a big star with the WWF in the early 80s. Like Vince Sr., you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
He was a big star in Memphis. He was a big star. He was actually a tag team partner of Sergeant Slaughter in the AWA, but they call himself the Super Destroyer Marks. And he was a big star in California, so it's kind of funny watching this guy come in and do the job for Savoli on a one-shot. But he was older, and the Savolis did have that Montreal connection, but he was a legendary wrestler, believe it or not.
So I want to make sure that I'm not getting this wrong. Who was this actually, like his name?
It was like a French name, actually, because he's from Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, like, I've only known two different wrestlers named as three, I guess.
Yeah.
Named Hangman, and that was not Bobby Jaggers to my knowledge.
Oh, no.
So,
No, this guy was a big deal in Montreal. I looked, some different people use the same name, but I looked at the pictures and old videos of him a few years back, and that was him. So, interesting. He comes in and does a favor for the Savolis, but I think that might have been just a one shot. But he was a very established guy, But you could tell he had the size and the build.
Yeah, it was pretty. It's pretty interesting to watch, I guess you could say. Yeah.
And Joe did his thing,
Of course, we had the Pringle Dynasty promo with Rick Rude, Jesse Barham, Percival Pringle III.
That was interesting because they were the Florida Tag Team Champions at the time. Clearly, it wasn't a generic promo because they were talking about Boston. They were talking about the Invaders, and they were talking about the Rock and Roll Rockers. So if they didn't come up, who knows with the Savolis, right? But if they didn't come up, there was a plan for them to come up.
Right.
Which makes sense. This was before the Florida ICW town agreement, but Gordon Soley was going back and forth. So that was probably the connection. But they definitely cut an ICW promo. Like that was definitely geared for the ICW audience.
Also, like I said, my knowledge of it doesn't go this far back until recently, somewhat recently, and especially through talking to you. So I really didn't have, excuse me, an idea that Rude and Pringle came through here this early. I remember, obviously, Rude did a couple shots, I think, in the 90s.
No idea. Yeah, I had no idea until I pulled up Ultimate Classic Wrestling, and I was actually shocked to see that promo because I don't remember any. I remember Rick Rude, but and Pringle too, but I don't remember that at all. But they were definitely at least considering some kind of angle up here, and who knows if it came across. I'm looking forward to the new episodes being released to see if they actually make it up, to New England. But
absolutely,
that was definitely a Boston ICW based promo with the places they were talking about, the people they were talking about. So
I don't think we mentioned who his partner was at this time. It was Jesse Barr. Yeah, I don't think I said that. So it was interesting. Like I said, probably it was 85. So by the beginning of the following year, he would be in WWF as well as Jimmy Jack Funk.
He would. Now, what happened was Terry and Dory Funk were teaming.
Yep.
And then they split them up, and it looks like Dory Funk needed a tag team partner. So they brought him in as the Jimmy Jack Funk. It was interesting that he came in as a mid-level team with Dory, but as soon as Dory left, he was wrestling underneath.
Yeah, and he was there for quite a while, too. I think he left either... 1980, late 87 or 88, something like that.
And then he used that name in Memphis and Portland and World Class. So he continued with the name Jimmy Jack Funk. But it seems like they needed a partner for Dory. He came in, and then as soon as that tag team split up, he was, losing on TV every week.
What did you think of him after his WWF run, using that like in World Class and stuff?
I think it's a good idea because most people recognize him as Jimmy Jack Funk.
Right.
Like I as a kid, I know him more as Jimmy Jack Funk than Jesse Barr because of WWF TV.
Right.
So I think that's the way to go. That's how people recognize you. Run with it.
And back then, you could have gotten away with it most of the time because today everything's copywritten and stuff, so you were not able to go to a different promotion with a different name, or using the same name that the WWF created. So a lot of people were able to do that then. But they also changed the name of Dory Funk Jr. WWF Hoss Funk. Was like made no sense. But
I'm sure that some people want to show how smart they are and say that Jesse Barr is great and Jimmy Jack Funk stinks. But most of us we know him as Jimmy Jack Funk. So.
Well, that's where I first saw him. I wasn't watching, that early on. We weren't getting the wrestling up here in the Northeast. Like you're in Mass, I'm in Connecticut. Like in New England, we weren't getting a lot of Southern Territory stuff like that much where he would have been on. But I enjoyed him. And, a lot of people think he wasn't that great, period. I was like, I think he's great. I like him a lot. And I loved his World Class run, later on. Yeah.
Well, obviously the WWF had a spot for him, so they must have saw something in him. But they did push him for a while. So
he was in there, and then obviously he just went the way of the preliminary guy for like his last couple of years there. So
once Hoss left.
Exactly.
They didn't have a spot for him.
I didn't even really realize he was there as late as he was until I was watching like the old WWF Challenge episodes that they have up there. I think they have 86 and 87. So I didn't realize he was there that late until I was watching Peacock not so long ago.
Yeah, I remember him getting beat up on TV a lot. But you know what, though? It's because I remember because he got pushed, so you kind of remember the guys who got pushed even when they're losing.
Yeah.
So, No, I like him. So.
Yeah, me too. Then, of course, there was Ray Apollo and the Tonga Kid.
Well, so was Dory Funk before that?
I did. He did come out, correct?
Yeah.
Or did I?
Yeah, Dory Funk as the Universal Champion.
Okay, so I'm messing it up here. Yep.
That's okay. He wrestled Fred Marzano, which was interesting because Fred Marzano was a long time underneath guy in the WWF from like the late 70s. The only recorded match I seen of him outside the WWF, doesn't mean he didn't have any, was that match. And then after that match, he went back to working underneath the WWF. So I'm not sure if seeing him on ICW card, kind of in the same roles he had in the WWF, was kind of interesting.
Well, a lot of times people would go to ICW. They weren't necessarily underneath guys if they were jobbing in WWF. A lot of times I've noticed,
Yeah, I think from what I saw, from what I know, I think he just came in for that one match.
Okay.
And went back. I mean, who knows? Because they don't record every match, but that's the only recorded match he ever had outside the WWF that I know of. So.
Well, I know that they leased out guys sometimes to the Savoldis. At least I was told that by Mario, and I was told that, by both Marios, excuse me, Mancini and Savoldi at one point, because I remember Mancini telling me that he worked down there with Tommy Dreamer, and I remember Mario Savoldi telling me as well that they they would bring in guys, so that they would send guys down there. So that he could have been part of that, like being leased out, and they worked with everybody, the Savoldis. That's the way they said.
No, they did. And then so Jory was the top guy in Puerto Rico at that time.
Right.
So it was after his NWA run, after his big run in Florida. And I think his brother was in the WWF at the time. And then,
so he went in first?
Yeah, he did. He went as a solo.
Okay.
So I think Jory hooked up with him maybe not that long after this.
Okay.
So he was still not in his prime, but he had a lot of juice left at this point, if that makes sense.
Yeah. He was around for quite some time.
Yeah,
Dory, at least.
He was huge in Japan well after this.
I think, did he wrestle a UWFI show, if I remember?
He may have. I know he showed up in Smoky Mountain. He showed up in WCW, believe it or not. He showed up in ECW with his brother.
I remember the WCW, like at one of the Slamborees, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's when they would have Legends matches to start the show off, and then and then Slamboree just faded away into just they just did not want to recognize the Legends anymore. So,
no, I just understandable too. I mean, you got a young audience that has no idea who these guys are. So
it was understandable, but you're sitting here watching Tully Blanchard come out with like a bald head and. He just looked crazy, but no, I enjoyed the Legends matches, even though they weren't necessarily anything to be like, oh man, this is awesome. But it was enjoyable to see certain guys. But like you said, it was a younger audience that most of these people are like, who the hell is this guy?
That's what it was. Yeah. So I understand that.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Of course, like I said, Ray Apollo and the Tonga Kid. Now, was Tonga Kid in the WWF at the time?
I thought he had just left the WWF.
Okay.
And at that point, he was wrestling for AWA.
Okay.
He was wrestling in Texas for All-Star Texas Wrestling.
Yep.
And he was wrestling for the Savoldi. So he was kind of trying to find his niche in between. What happened with him was him and Superfly, and he talked about this on the record.
Yeah.
Were supposed to be the tag team champions because Superfly was getting a little bit older. He wanted the Tonga Kid to take the bumps and he could hit the Superfly splash with the hot tag. But when and they were pushing Tonga Kid really heavy, but then once Snooker left, it just wasn't a spot for him. But I guess the cream rises because 2 years later he would come back to WWF with a big.
He
push.
Was whatchamacallit was he Tama when he came back? Yep, part of the Islanders. Yep.
Yes, he was. Right. So yeah, this was actually right after his WWF run, so everybody there remembered him from TV. It wasn't long after.
Right. This was I thought that this was a great match. I really enjoyed this one.
Well, it's interesting. I know Ray Apollo was broken in by the Samoans, his opponent.
Really?
Yeah. He gives him Alpha and Sika broke him in. So, and they were with the Savoys at this time too. So.
Yes, I ended up looking up Ray Apollo as well because he ended up going on and doing jobs in WWF. Yeah,
he was doing the Clown.
Yeah. He was. I was about to bring that up. Yep.
Yeah.
He was Doink the Clown. He did a lot of different stuff. And he was. I confused him and the other guy for a while.
Phil.
Phil. But he eventually, he went by Ray Apollo. And did he go by another name or no? Besides Doink, I'm trying to remember.
No. The only other thing he did was him and Rocco Rock from Public Enemy.
Yep.
Were the African team that wrestled the Steiners at Starrcade 90 in the Texas Memorial Cup. Yeah, they brought him in. It must have been a tryout because he came in, him and Rocco a couple months before, and he wrestled a couple matches for WCW, and then he popped back up a couple months later in that tournament. So, and then he wrestled as himself quite a bit as well too. So,
yeah, and I remember obviously he was one of the Doinks as well.
Yeah, he was actually the longest tenured Doink, believe it or not.
Was he still using that after It says that if I
he
remember, if I'm reading it, he retired that as in 2014. Stopped using it in 2014.
He did use it. He did use it afterwards. He went to Puerto Rico and Japan with it, but
Yep.
he was actually in the WWF from like '93 to '95.
Oh,
So
wow.
he actually wrestled this Doink. He didn't make the impact that Matt Bourne made, but he wrestled this Doink longer in the WWF.
At that point, the Doink character was like being weeded out. Kind of. It just wasn't that interesting as it was like in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean he wrestled with Bam Bam. Ray Apollo wrestled as Doink. Him and Dink wrestled Bam Bam and Luna at WrestleMania 10 at Madison
Okay,
Square
that was wow.
So
he had a WrestleMania moment.
Madison Square Garden. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's probably better off doing a goofy version than trying to recreate the evil clown. I think it'd be tough trying to recreate what Matt Bourne did. But yeah, he got a say what you want. The guy had a nice 2-year run as a character, so he did well for himself.
Absolutely. So what else is there with that? Now we're done with this episode. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, I guess we could talk about some of the Eric Embry, because I know we're both big fans, and we can remember him from the late '80s World Class, where he replaced Devon Eriks as the top good guy out there. And
I loved him as a babyface in that storyline where, and I was watching a World Class or a not documentary. What's it called? An interview today earlier where they were talking about how the name change came up with World Class from World Class to USWA, because I guess Jerry Jarrett had bought 51% of the company.
Yes, he did.
And then Kevin was quite upset about it, so he sent cease and desist to Embry and the Jarrett. So
he sure did.
So then he was just like, well, we can't just change the name. They came up with the name USWA. They couldn't just change the name. So then they created this whole storyline. And I have to tell you, this is one of the greatest storylines, in my personal opinion, in the history of that promotion, like that history of wrestling, really, the way that everything just unfolded. But, and then them ripping the World Class flag down.
I actually do remember that.
Yeah, it's like, it was pretty, like, if you grew up watching World Class, it was just like, it was a total end of an era right there, like with that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the thing I loved about Eric Embry's run in World Class, this might be blasphemy, reminds me very much of Vince Russo when he was in WWF, because it was it was episodic television, and a lot of times they leave you with a cliffhanger to get you to come back the next week. So it was very storyline based, but the matches were bloody, and they were weapons, and they were violent. But they always have a little cliffhanger to have you come back the next week. The thing I loved about Embry is you had guys like Kamala and Cactus Jack, and he was the little engine that could. He would just get his rear end beat all match and just keep getting up and up and up and up, and that's what I loved about him. But yeah, I remember one particular storyline which I loved, and I don't remember this one, Rick. It was when all the good guys cleared the ring, and they were all celebrating, and Embry kind of wandered on his own to somehow in the back of the sportatorium, and you saw her arm reach in, pull him out, and then threw him back in, and he was a bloody mess. So
I do remember this. Yeah,
it ended up being Killer Tim Brooks.
Yes,
but we didn't. I mean, I don't know. It was 30. We didn't know for a long time who it was.
Right.
So it was like a who done it. So they didn't give it away till like another 2 or 3 months. They actually kept Tim Brooks on the shelf if he was even in the arena at the time, and then he came back. So they do like little things like that to keep you coming back every week.
It was very exciting, like literally very exciting. It was. You can say that it was like I would say it's a very heavy influencer on ECW in a way, like with the weapons and the violence and the fast storylines and stuff like that.
It was a fight every week. Yeah. And then Percy was his manager, which was kind of weird to have the top good guy have a manager, but I remember Percy was his manager for that time.
It was also weird seeing Percy as a babyface. That's another thing, because he was a heel manager for so long, like an arrogant, fat, rich guy kind of a thing, and it's just like, but he came in there and he was awesome. I thought it was great, but it worked because it was part of that storyline where everything unfolded before the big company change and stuff like that. So it worked really well together. I
mean, even at 14, I had to get a laugh though, because remember Eric Embry was suspended for a while. He lost a lose-lease town match.
Right.
So Percy Pringle came in with a big box of envelopes from thousands of fans who rode to get him reinstated across the country, and you look in the sportatorium, there can't be more than 300 people there, but thousands of people rode across the country to get him reinstated. But no, I think Eric Embry being small in a ring full of giants really helped him a lot too, because he just got beat on, and somehow he would just find a way.
Yeah,
character-wise,
Yeah, one of the things that he was also saying in this interview I watched, that they created the light heavyweight belt for him because he was ready to quit.
I did not know that. Really?
He was ready to quit. He went over to Gary Hart's or whatever, say goodbye, and Gary's like, "Hold on." He got in the car with him, and then they drove over to Fritz's, and I guess they ended up somehow creating the light heavyweight belt. But what was it in 1988? He wrestled Jeff Jarrett at Super Clash, for the light heavyweight belt. Now he was a babyface at the time too.
It was baby first babyface, and they kind of worked it where one of them, I think Jarrett got injured.
He landed on his arm or something like that.
Eric wanted to check on him. Yeah. But I remember him. Yeah, he's a feud with the Simpsons over that title, the light heavyweight. And then here's kind of funny. Phil Apollo actually challenged him for that title in late '88.
Wow.
Speaking of like, not that important if you're not a Savoldi fan, but he did challenge Eric for that championship.
There is a lot of connections like between the two companies. Like if you go and watch it, there's a lot of connections even before like the merger that they had in 91 or 90 whatever.
It was early 91.
Yeah, so there's a lot of connections prior, like that. It's just you might not even realize it, but there is like a lot of weird connections.
Yeah, think about World Class. So Kevin bought Jerry Jarrett gave him the name back.
Yeah, they got a cease and desist, so they just said have it basically.
But he had no TV, and then the Sportatorium, they didn't have the money to run shows at the Sportatorium. So before he sold to Savoldi, all he had was a name. They couldn't run shows, they couldn't get television, so
so then he gave up. So pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It was pretty interesting to hear that story on the podcast. So you can go to my Mario Savoldi episode and check that out. You hear the whole story.
Yeah.
It's a good cheap plug right there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, dude, it was just like Kevin was the only one that was like involved at that time. Like Kerry was in WWF, right?
WWF, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was listening to John Arezzi's Wrestling Spot podcast, and on the initial IWCCW show in January of 1991, Kerry was advertised to be there. I don't if he got there or not. I have no idea. But Kerry, the Iceman, Chris Adams, and Carlos Colon, for whatever reason, were all advertised for being on that initial show. I'm not sure who. I know Kevin made it. I don't know if anybody else of those guys made it up.
Kevin, I think, told me he worked 4 matches that one taping and then didn't go back.
Yeah, they had him. All big name guys. It was like the Butcher, Kalua, Zip, Cannonball, who was Rusty Brooks, Taz.
Right.
He did a promo with Rumble, and I know they were supposed to have him fight Tony Atlas, but they probably never got around to that. But yeah, he did what he had to do, and he got out. What's interesting about Kevin is because you watch his matches in WCCW, he's still ultra athletic.
Yes.
So in January of '92, a year after he sold the name, WWF was considering bringing Kevin in and putting him in a tag team with Kerry, thinking maybe Kerry would get a second life in a tag team. So him and Brian Lee had a tryout match in Texas in January of '92, and not sure what, but for whatever reason, the WWF did decide not to bring either one of those two guys in. But they did take a look at him about a year after he sold out to the Savolis. They took a real look at him.
I did hear that him and Kerry teamed up in Texas as a tag team in a dark match.
I know Kevin wrestled Brian Lee. That much I do know.
Okay. Yeah, and I read this like I don't know, a bunch of years back. So I think it was like one of those things where they were in Texas. You know, Kerry's with us. They're kind of legends in this area. Let's just put them together for one night, and then I obviously, like you said, nothing probably ever came of it. And I'm surprised that that's a guy that never made it to WWF. I'm surprised actually. Kevin, yeah. I mean, Brian Lee obviously would a couple years later, but like Kerry, I was actually even shocked when he showed up there. But I was like, I guess it makes sense because there was no more World Class. So
by the time like World Class folded, I mean, they had some interest in Kevin, but at that point, probably he just didn't have enough left in the tank to bring him in full time. I know in '89, when I used to watch WCW, Joe Pedicino was running vignettes, and Kevin Von Erich was actually advertised as coming in. In 1980, he didn't make it in, but they were definitely doing some vignettes, and Joe Pedicino was talking about Kevin Von Erich coming in. It just, it didn't happen. He was 49% owner of his own company, so it makes sense why he wouldn't.
Yeah.
I
don't ever remember that, to be honest with you, but that's crazy.
I'm a huge Von Erich fanatic.
Yeah.
Cult-like, you know what I mean? So.
Well, I mean, Joe Pedicino used to do those wrestling news segments where they weren't necessarily all, it was on the NWA television programming. It wasn't necessarily all NWA WCW, but
this was Turner, and he was actually he said Kevin Von Erich will be arriving in WCW, and like I said, Kerry kind of flirted with it as well a few times too. So
did he just retire, Kevin, at that time period? Like he just pretty much left.
Yeah, he was in and out. Like he would show up in Puerto Rico or Mexico or tri-state or do an African tour, but he never really put his foot on the gas once.
Once the company was gone,
right? But I mean, even in January '92, the WWF was at least looking at him,
right?
But man, I see his IWCCW matches, and he still had a lot of athletic ability, even then,
Yeah, I did ask Mario about Lance Von Erich. Obviously, you probably heard it, but he doesn't really remember much about him other than coming in for one thing.
He came in and wrestled Greg Valentine. He did most of his stuff overseas, actually. So but he did some stuff for Eddie Mansfield, and he was
IWF.
Yeah, you can see him on YouTube. He is a monster. Like he's like 300 pounds and ripped to the bone. And he came up and he did that one match with Valentine that I know of. So, but he was mostly like in South Africa, India, and those places.
Well, I think he still lives in India, if I remember.
Or Mexico? Is it Mexico now? I think.
Is it Mexico now? I'm trying to remember who told me in an interview that they just never came back. Like,
yeah.
So, yeah. You probably know what I'm talking about. The interview.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. No, it was somebody I was interviewing just told me that they were out there, and then he just
no kidding,
decided that he wasn't coming back to the United States. I'm trying to remember which interview it was that I did recently. It had to be if I went back and looked, I'd probably figure it out.
I don't remember that.
I don't have me neither, obviously, and I did the damn interview. So, yeah.
And then of course, Joe Savoli's on this card, the other half of that, who we just for years. I mean, me and you were talking. Everybody for years was wondering why Joe Savoli did make it big, and me and you have talked about how when he went to UWF with Bill Watts with that big push, and then all of a sudden his push died and he ended up in the Northeast. But Mario said he just didn't want to do the travel anymore, which makes perfect sense if you saw what happened in UWF, how he came in with that big push, how it ended, and how he was out. And then we also found out too that Ole Anderson was trying to bring him into Jim Crockett Promotions at that time too. So
and then I always thought Joe should have been on a national level because I just thought he was that good. Whether he was just is he going to be up in Flair's level? Probably not, but you know what I mean. I think that he could have had a really, really good run, especially in WCW in that time period.
It sounds like he just didn't want it. You know, and it really explains like why he was getting that big push, and then he got jobbed out, and then he left. It was like boom, like right overnight when he was over in UWF like '86.
Yeah, it's sometimes people maybe they weren't offering enough money for the amount of travel that you'd have to be doing, which wrestling was way different then than it is now with the money and stuff like that. So.
And we're talking too off the air. We're talking about the S&S Express with Joseph Boy and Vic Steamboat. Were the original S&S Express, which happened about 6 months after the show we reviewed. In early '86, he went up to Portland with Steve Simpson, and they were the top tag team. They were the tag team champions up there. So if anybody is watching, if you go on YouTube and watch Joe Savoli and Steve Simpson versus Mike Miller and Carl Steiner, Carl Steiner is actually Bob Delasara. And, you can watch an amazing 20-minute match where Savoli and Simpson win the tag titles, and the place is just so far behind them. The crowd is just behind them 100% in that match.
like I said, I think off air, I was like, I didn't get to watch much Portland until
Neither
well
did I.
after it went out of business. Like, and I ended up watching it through like videos or whatever, and then of course with the advent of YouTube, and I watched I don't know if you've ever seen the Wrestling Legends Network. It's the
I have not.
the Jarrett Parsons Network, or they started it and they've changed the name like 3 times, but no, it's $3.99 a month. I know I'm not supposed to be advertising that
That's fine.
but I'm going to tell you, it's got some really classic territories. They own a bunch of Portland tapes, and it's like, I went up there one day and watched like every one that they had, and it's so freaking cool. Like I wish that I had gotten that TV over here, like in the 80s and stuff like that, because it's such a cool product. Like, but the camera angles were the one thing to me that bugged me, because it's like, the hard cam wasn't necessarily centered properly, and it was always kind of like, it looked like it was like just like a bad indie kind of like, it was just like the way that it was angled, and it just looked so cheesy, and it sounded like the way that they were talking about it was like a bowling arena or something. Like
I think it was.
So I'm just like, that's
I heard
so
say that,
they have like bleachers set up and all this stuff in a bowling area, so it's just wild and crazy to think about, like the places that wrestling would run for television tapings.
Well, I remember as a kid, Jim Crockett Promotions, that little TV studio they had.
Yeah.
It could have been more than like 15, 20 people in there,
That's, I was thinking about that today, because I was watching, while I was out running around today with my wife, I was in the car and I was scrolling through Facebook, and somebody had posted the 1989 return of Steamboat.
Yeah, in that studio. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm just like, they wasted this huge return on like 30 people. Like,
well, but that was a tag match. It was him and Eddie Gilbert in a tag match. But then they were building for the Chi-Town Rumble.
Yeah,
him and Flair. So that was what the big payoff was.
Yeah, but I'm just like, imagine if that was in like a bigger arena or something, like a bigger TV taping, the pop that he probably would have gotten, because nobody really knew at the time. There was no internet, so nobody really knew much unless you read things like the Observer or something. Really.
He was advertised for like 3 weeks as Mr. X.
Yes.
And then he showed up. Once he showed up, everybody knew who he was. But he was a mystery partner. And then I was surprised when he showed up.
Me too.
Yeah,
I saw that live and flipped out. Like,
yeah. I was kind of I did not flip, but I was very a Ric Flair fan, and I took wrestling really seriously. Like,
me too. Yeah,
like a real sport. So when he got in there, I was like nervous. Like it's like your favorite team is playing another team. So I mean, I can remember when Barry Windham beat Dusty Rhodes for the U.S. Championship.
Yeah,
I was a huge Barry Windham fan. I don't know if you remember when Ronnie Garvin knocked Dusty out.
Yeah. Yep.
I did not enjoy it, and I don't remember it because I spent most of it, the 30-minute match, pacing around. So like, it was like to me, it was like a real sport,
No, I fully agree. I mean, even today, when I refer to professional wrestling, I don't, I consider it, I just know that the outcome is predetermined. So,
I wasn't enjoying it. I was like watching your favorite team in the Super Bowl. I was in agony watching Barry Windham,
right.
But I guess that was the presentation back then,
Yeah, but the one thing that I wanted to point out with that Steamboat return is they were like a masked man came in here and signed the contract. They kept referring to a guy in a mask.
Yeah.
It's like, that doesn't look like a guy in a mask. That looks like Ricky Steamboat.
Well, at that point, you want everybody to see him, because it is Ricky Steamboat. So
right.
Yeah. At some point, you got to give it away at some point, So
no, it was hilarious the way they presented it. I thought.
Yeah.
So.
And that was him and Eddie Gilbert versus Windham and Flair. He caught one of them with the crossbody. I forget which one he beat, but.
Yeah, that part I don't remember. I didn't see the result, but I mean, I have, but just not recently, so I don't remember. But Flair's post-match promo where he's flipping out like, you don't belong here, you don't belong here. Like, that was just freaking insane. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack for real. Flipping out.
You as a Flair fan, you could see the writing on the wall. Like, I knew Steve was going to beat him at Chi-Town Rumble,
I mean, I enjoyed. That's the one thing that as a kid I always loved Steamboat. I loved Flair too. I mean, he wasn't one of even when I was like a person that watched wrestling like a kid, they always gravitate towards the baby faces.
Right.
I mean, after about a year watching wrestling, I kind of like didn't care. I just liked who I liked, but it was just like, even Flair, even as a heel, was like still one of my favorites. But the thing with like Steamboat is I really liked him, but it's like, shit, I forgot where I was going with this story. But like, oh, okay. Like, while I feel like the Steamboat deserved it and probably, it would have made for great matches, which obviously we still talk about those matches, especially the 2 out of 3 falls match today. Steamboat's title run was rather short compared to,
It was,
and it was pretty uneventful if you think about it.
It wasn't. I saw him when he came to Boston that summer for the Great American Bash. He came up and fought Lex Luger.
Yeah.
He was with his wife and his baby. The crowd hated him.
Really?
The wife and the baby thing just did not click. I mean, everybody was pro Lex Luger in Boston. I remember my dad always told me, yell at the wrestlers all you want because it's their fair game. And so Ricky Steamboat came walking by with his little Ricky and his wife, and I yelled at him. My dad whacked me, goes, "Knock it off." And I'm like, what? And he's like, he's with his wife and his kid. Knock it off. But he got but yeah, no. It's not a river. When he came up to Boston with his wife and his baby with him, the crowd hated him. I mean,
That's crazy.
I was there in the first row. It was a pro Luger crowd all the way.
I heard that. I don't know if like he necessarily wanted to do that. It was like his wife that was his idea, kind of a thing.
I believe so. I'm going to plug John Arezzi again.
I think that's where I heard it. Yeah.
On one of his old, podcasts, is an interview with him and Ricky.
Yeah.
Where it was that's kind of where the John Arezzi show switched from an entertainment show to a news-oriented show. Is when Ricky Steamboat went on the show and complained about his contract. So I know his wife was his agent, and she overpriced him, and he was talking about on the Arezzi show. She priced him out.
Yeah, and then he ended up going back to WWF as just the Dragon.
Yeah, he started off like he went to that South Atlantic Pro in Japan for a while, and then he was never the same after. After that.
I don't even, and I think that they're not even married anymore, if I remember correctly. So that's how it worked out for him. Oh, so not to make a joke, but
no, it happened.
No, but he in the South Atlantic, or I think it was NAWA at the time. I don't know if he was at the South Atlantic, during the name change. That part, I don't, because the history there for me is real murky because I didn't discover that until years later.
You're right. It was NAWA because it was when Robert Fuller and Paul Jones were in charge.
Yeah,
and I remember reading about it in PWI, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, his run there, it was just, I think he just wrestled old jobbers, if I remember correctly. Like, I don't think he had any major storyline, to my knowledge, at least from the footage I've seen.
He went into the initial tournament to crown the champion.
Yeah,
and he put over Fuller in the finals.
Okay,
I know that just from PWI.
So that might be because anything that they've shown on TV in the TV shows, because now they're all up on the Ultimate Classic Wrestling network. Not all of them, obviously. I don't know. But then there's a lot that you can find on YouTube. Any of the matches you find are pretty much kind of squash matches for the most part of Steamboat in that territory. But I enjoyed that territory because it reminded me so much of watching what I watched in the NWA growing up.
Well, familiar faces from there.
Yeah. Well, I guess that was their goal because, like, after WCW separated from the NWA, they lost a lot of television, like Mid-Atlantic television. So they went in there and tried to scoop up all the television that Mid-Atlantic was on. So, and it did not last very long, probably a couple of years. But unfortunately, and they think they switched owners a few times as well, if I'm not mistaken.
One thing that impressed me about the Savoldi show that I saw like an hour ago, just how deep that card was. Going back to the show, like, I mean, different guys were at different trajectories in their career. Like maybe the Hangman was on the way down. Maybe Apollo and Fabiano hadn't really hit their peak yet. Right. Almost everybody on that show at some point had a nice little run somewhere.
The sheep herders, I mean, were still kind of
huge stars.
They were huge, they weren't allowed to. They were just about to hit They ended up having two more peaks after that. Really, I mean, if you think about it,
UWF, you mean, or
there was like the UWF, then they went over to the NWA, and obviously they ended up making a shit ton of money for Vince as well.
Oh yeah.
So
I'm just even talking about like the Hangman, Lou Fabiano, Ray Apollo, like all those guys that might not have been in their prime in 1985, but all those guys had a nice little run for themselves someplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
It looked like from what I saw here, and it's tough to piece it together. It looks like the WWC run merger was starting to kind of go away a little bit, and maybe they were in transition at a transition point during this show.
We have to figure that out for the next episode that we
It's
that we
hard
do.
it's so murky with the Savoldis, like the way like these mergers came in and out. It was difficult, but there was definitely a WWC working agreement during this. But
Yeah,
you were seeing less and less guys from that territory on this show. What I'm really dying to know is if Rude and Bar ever actually did make it up, because I know in the past guys have. I've seen guys shoot promos like DDP and the Fantastics.
Yep.
And this is years later. I don't know if those guys ever actually made up to Savoldi, but they shot some promos for Savoldi.
Yeah.
So
And
it's hard to tell.
another weird thing about it is like they don't upload consistently enough, like things that are in a row necessarily. They'll grab like one episode here, be like, oh, this looks interesting, kind of thing. I don't know what I'm not trying to insult them at all by any means, but it's like try to upload like a month or two's worth of the same thing, and you know what I mean, keep us entertained, and storyline wise will keep us interesting, even though it's like I do bounce around on that network a lot. Like I'll sit there, one night I watch like the South Atlantics, and I haven't watched the global stuff on there yet because I've watched it all on ESPN, and that's still kind of fresh in my memory in a way, and so that's like and then the IWCCW stuff, but then they upload like the late period NWA on Fire stuff that they owned, which I don't know, and it's nothing against them, but I don't know how much interest there is in that. But there is a lot of really great guys that are probably on TV now, like on Raw and SmackDown, that worked there, like Tommaso Ciampa, and I know he went through there, and I know other guys. I just can't think off the top of my head right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting with the Savoldis, though. Like Man Mountain War is like in line. He's in line to beat Tony Atlas for the ICW title, and then the next week Paulie's gone and he's gone. So and then Lethal Weapons are the tag team champions, and they're gone the next week. So things were always changing. So I think even if the shows were in chronological order, you'd see a lot of inconsistent stuff. Guys coming in, guys coming out. So
But they always had Joseph only.
They didn't though. Remember, he
No,
left.
that's
He went
that's
to Portland.
true.
Yeah,
that is true.
Because right after this, he goes to Portland.
Yeah.
So and he went to Oklahoma. So it was like a fun show to watch, though, man.
Yeah, and of course we're going to be bringing this more often to you, the
absolutely.
fans, the listeners. I'm excited to start this project with you because I'm always interested in watching some old Savoldi footage, and I go back to this quite a bit. So I'm not sure when the next one will be, but we'll definitely keep it together. We're in touch constantly, all day, every day, pretty much. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's funny that the Tonka Kid too, like he covered the Cream Rise, and like after his whole run ended in the WWF, he came into the WCW as a Samoan Savage.
I remember that. Yeah,
and he ended up replacing Sabu in the SST. So he didn't have a long career, but man, he did a lot in the 70s.
Well, he was with them in World Class and then WCW, right? Correct?
No, that was Rikishi Fatu and Samu were in World Class, and then
then he came in with him in WCW, right?
Yeah, he was the third man.
Okay,
and
I wasn't sure if he was. I'm sorry to cut you off. I wasn't sure if they were all three of them together in World Class because I'm trying to my memory's a little hazy. So
it was Rikishi Fatu and Samu.
Yeah,
and then they brought the Tonga Kid in, Samoan Savage, a good 60 pounds bigger. And then Samu left the country and teamed with Kokana, Yokozuna.
Yeah.
So you had the SST international. The international version was Kokana and Samu, and Fatu and the Samoan Savage were the SST and the WCW. So maybe they might have brought him in as a third man. Always planned to bring him in because he wasn't. They didn't wrestle as a threesome for that long.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really weird since in WCW, Samu was just there as a singles at one point.
Yeah, he may have, yeah.
Yeah, because I forgot. He might have wrestled Dick Murdoch, if I remember. I don't know. It was just...
It
was somebody... It was like a weird one-off like squash match, basically, for him. So...
But Rikishi and Samu did come in from World Class to WCW together. Actually, an interesting story is Crockett wanted to buy World Class. And
really?
Before he folded, and he wasn't buying anything, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before Jared was going to be, Crockett was going to buy him. And I think the only people he was interested in were Michael Hayes, the Von Erichs, and the SST.
And Michael Hayes had probably just left WCW, I'm guessing, right? Because wasn't he in there for like 88? He was
actually,
in there.
He just left, and then he came back.
Yeah.
So he came back. So it was like in between WCW stints. But yeah, those are the only 5 guys that they're interested in. And then when they folded, then you really can't buy anything when you can't keep your own business open, right? So
yeah. He would end up running the Sportatorium, Crockett, like later on, and then 95. Yeah.
Because he settled out there after he bought UWF, he moved out to Dallas.
Yeah. And then I think like once he, sold to Turner and then was kind of out of it for a while, he started using the NWA name again.
Which was the whole ECW.
I think ECW was around. Yeah. It was, well, I think ECW was the big part of the NWA at that time. And then they separated, I think, in 94, was it?
94 is when Douglas threw the belt down. And
yeah. And so I think that Crockett started running again,
in Dallas. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, so and I think in 95 under the NWA name. Yep.
Yes, exactly. It happened after the ECW thing. He went back home to Dallas, and he had all the old world-class guys. I never seen it, but I know I used to see the results in PWI.
I got the TV up here briefly. I used to get this. Yeah, it was really weird. Trust me, because I'll tell you this, because I used to get this like low-powered UHF station, which was from like 2 towns over when I lived in a town called Woodbridge, Connecticut. It was in West Haven, Connecticut, the television station. And I used to get them. This is where later period I would see the Savoldi stuff, like up until they closed. What else did I get? I would get Global on there. That NWA, they would show like NWA Southwest, which was like an indie in the early, maybe it wasn't around then. I'm trying to think. There was literally wrestling on 5 nights a week there on that channel. I'd get the USWA from the studio, like and then, it was weird. And then I would get Smoky Mountain too.
Okay.
So I'd get all those. And then Saturday morning, they would rerun everything that they played Monday through Friday, and all for like 6 hours. So,
see, by 95, by the time I know the Savoldis were around, World Class Dallas, AWF.
It was definitely tail end of Savoldi, like
All I watched back then was ECW, WWF. I got my fill from those 3, and I was fine with that. I didn't really at that point. I wasn't too cool for wrestling, but I had other things going on. You know what I mean? So I definitely was very open about being a wrestling fan, but there were. I didn't have to watch every single thing that came across my TV,
I think I still had a few years before I gave that up. Now I just watch what I like and forget the rest.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not. I don't really follow the WWE now, but my son absolutely loves it. I was walking around today, and he was watching it, and he sat through 12 hours of WrestleMania. So he absolutely goes crazy over it. So. It's good for him. It's just maybe just a different era, different generation.
It's definitely that, because it's like I said. So I have a friend that I knew from like the music industry, and he's finally watching WWE. But like he starts talking to me about that, and like he's several years younger than me, but he's like really enjoying it. I'm like, it's I know who everybody is, and I do watch it because I watch the pay-per-views, but I don't watch like the main stuff. But this kid like absolutely is like in love with it. It's wild to think about that.
My
Like,
son's like
yeah. And I know people are completely like that with AEW as well, but I don't give 2 craps about that either. So,
I don't complain about the wrestling industry, because if I had the answers how to fix it, I'd be a multimillionaire. I don't.
It's
I
called
don't have
money.
any answers.
It's money. That's all you need.
But I like what I like, and I don't like what I don't like, and I've never taken a bump or anything. I've never worked in the business. I just enjoy watching it.
Yeah, I like the I like the old school stuff, the 80s, early 90s, stuff like that, and the territories. So I still go back and watch that. I do watch some modern stuff. Just I don't. I'm not a diehard like I was at one point. So. Right. Yeah. Well, Anthony, what's that? Go ahead.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Oh no, it was really fun. I really like. The thing that blew me away when I turned this on an hour ago, and just the talent that they had up and down that road.
Dude, that could have sold out in the arena, like in the United States, most of this. You know what I mean?
They had them all in their prime, right?
Yeah.
You could get like Ray Apollo 5 years later. If you can get like the Hangman 5 years earlier, and you get all those guys like, you know what I mean? You got all those guys right where they were hitting their peak. Wow.
Yeah. Yep.
But, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that was awesome.
That was awesome.
No, I really appreciate you having me on. It was
We're definitely going to do this again, sooner than, very, very soon. So I want to thank you.
Thank you so much.
Why don't we just give out where could the folks find you?
Just find me on Facebook as Anthony Brennan, and if you can put up with my obnoxious political opinions, and there's also some wrestling mixed in there, and some pictures of my kids who play sports. I'm gonna brag. My 11-year-old daughter is a captain of her football team, tackle, nose guard, D tackle, DN.
Wow.
Offensive tackle, offensive guard. She's on the same team as her brother who plays linebacker. So some pictures of some kids, a lot of wrestling, and you see the politics just keep scrolling.
Just ignore them like I do, No, I would probably sit there and talk politics. We'd probably have a good probably have a good conversation, but I don't like to. I feel like I'm already gonna have an aneurysm for many other things. So
you know what? Though it's nice to have something like where you can talk with, have nothing to do with current events or the world.
Yeah,
like a pro wrestling. I really enjoy having my escape too. So
yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's podcasting and wrestling and sometimes music.
Music too. So I'll look for Rick Del Santo, and Anthony Brennan's one of his friends, and just hit me up. I have no. I'll accept a request from anybody.
And he's a good guy. Just talk wrestling. All right, everybody. Thank you very much, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.
Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's THEWFIA.org, and become a member today.